Welcome to the BTS Presents show.
I'm Brian Schulman, I'm the producer. We're currently doing segments on Santa Cruz County and Silicon Valley real estate behind the scenes. Thanks for watching.
Hi, I'm Candace Bradfield, broker and owner of Bradfield & Associates, and past president of our Santa Cruz County Association of Realtors. I want to thank you for joining BTS Presents.
Hi, I'm Donna Calsa. Welcome to today's episode. I have with me about 7 guests. We have sitting in the far seat the Honorable Mayor David Terrazas of Santa Cruz. Welcome. Nice to have you here.
Thank you, Dada, and thanks everybody for being here tonight.
So generally we have very politically involved people, passionate about the community, and I think the one thing everybody here has in common is that they care, and they may have differing opinions on that, but we pride ourselves in providing a nice forum for people to have a spirited and respectful discussion about whatever issues. So lately the topic in the news has largely been about housing, and Mayor Terrazas has been doing a lot of work. I think coming up later this month, they're discussing amendments to the downtown plan to add as many as 750 housing units, and this is largely in response to the runaway housing costs. So, Mayor, if you care to share a little bit more on that or any other details.
Sure. I think over the last several years, there's been a tremendous amount of community concern about our current housing situation. You know, not only the cost of housing, but the lack of housing that's available. So the city's been looking at how we can increase some of our density in our downtown. So recently the city made amendments to our downtown plan, which were recently approved by the Coastal Commission. Those amendments will allow up to another 750 units in our downtown. In addition to some of the changes in our downtown plan, we've also had the entire council really taking a concerted efforts in looking at housing policy. A housing blueprint subcommittee was formed about a year ago that looked at housing policy in the city. There was a group of interested local residents that were meeting with council members on a regular basis to talk about specific policy measures. Just recently, that committee had a public meeting to look at what are some of the outcomes of those discussions that have taken place. So on June 26th, that's later this month, the Housing Subcommittee, along with the Planning Department, are going to be bringing back some of the recommendations in regards to housing policy for the city. So those are some ways that, one, there could be more focus on increasing the number of units in the city and looking at ways where we can expand the amount of affordable housing in the city of Santa Cruz. I know that a lot of people have talked about the surveys that have come out, or even data that's shown that the city of Santa Cruz is one of the least affordable housing markets, not only in the world. I think there was an Australian group that looked at housing costs. And I think some of these efforts are trying, in response, to look at how we can increase the amount of supply to help better affect the cost of housing here in the city. So I'm really excited to see those recommendations as they come forward on June 26th, and also to hear from the public as far as what are other measures that we could be looking at to help not only increase the supply of housing in the city, but also look at other areas of policy that I think are really important for us moving forward to ensure that families are able to stay in Santa Cruz, that we can create housing for not only our children, but their children.
Okay, and I know that the city passed a rent freeze a little while ago that was somewhat controversial, and that there is a rent control measure being put on the ballot, subject to certification. I think it's supposed to be certified on the 11th or somewhere thereabouts. Do you care to speak a little bit to the history of that? And,
sure.
Where
I
see
think,
that going?
Yeah, definitely. I think that it was in February when there was a city council meeting that received a recommendation from the housing subcommittee that I mentioned, looking at how we could have some sort of pause on the costs of housing, increases in our rental stock, as well as proposal for just cause evictions. And I think that the housing subcommittee that brought that forward, we're looking at this in conjunction with a citizen group that is looking at, and they've gathered signatures that have been submitted to put a ballot measure on for the November election. So there's two parts in regards to the.
And that was the Movement for Housing Justice you're referring to?
The Movement for Housing Justice is they're the citizen group that's looking at a ballot measure for the November election. The emergency ordinance that you mentioned dealt in two parts. One had the kind of a rental freeze on multi-unit properties that were built prior to 1995. The just cause eviction would apply to all properties in the city, and so those were just cause eviction and the rental freeze.
And those were passed under basically you were exercising police powers under emergency. Basically, emergency measures. Is that?
It was an emergency measure. Is how it was prepared to enact the ordinance immediately, and it was again there was a recommendation that came from the committee to have that look at while the citizen measure is being circulated. So there was some discussion on the freeze as well as the just cause, but it still left a lot of questions in the air as far as what this means. And I know that there's been a lot of concerns not only from people that are property owners, but also tenants in regards to the implementation and what the impacts are of something like this. And I think that kind of dovetails into the citizen measure that you mentioned that's being proposed. We'll know, I think, later next week after the county clerk has completed their review of valid registered voters that signed the petition, if it qualifies for the ballot.
And then there's been some rumor that if it doesn't qualify, the city council may put forth their own measure. And I don't know if there's process that would even allow that, or is that?
Well, I mean, I was interviewed in a recent Good Times article about that. We were approached by some of the members of the Movement for Housing Justice, and this is a citizen measure that's being proposed. So I am not in a position to bring something forward to perfect something that they're circulating. So in that regard, I'm not aware of any sort of other measure that's being proposed.
Okay. Well, thank you. Really, we appreciate. I think anybody, whether they agree or disagree with the methods, I think we all appreciate the energy that you and the city council are putting into this. It's a serious thing that touches all of us. Sarah Taylor, sitting to your left, is a local realtor for 5 years. And what brings you onto the show? Clearly, you've seen at the ground level what's going on with the housing.
With the housing. Well, Data, I am a local realtor. I've been an agent for 5 years now, and I'm really busy. I just closed my 45th escrow in less than 4 years.
Wow.
So every weekend I do open houses, Saturday and Sunday, and as soon as somebody walks in my open, then usually the first or second question I ask them is, how did you hear about my open? And they'll tell me I saw it online. And probably about 90% of the people that walk in my opens say to me that they live over the hill. They're looking to buy a home here because home prices we call it over the hill. San Jose area has just skyrocketed, and many of these people are willing to move to Santa Cruz, buy a nice home near the beach, and commute. So what I've seen living here since 1975, 45 years, is that we just have a huge influx of people that want to purchase homes here in Santa Cruz, and it's caused clearly a housing issue. We've got the traffic, which we see every day now, which has been going on. So I definitely see that we've heard about the rents going crazy. I mean, when I talk to a client that's renting, they're paying $3,500 a month for a 2-bedroom, which is amazing. I mean, that's just unheard of, I think, most of the country. So I definitely see that we have a lot of people that are living in San Jose, they're buying here, it's raising the prices here, which really makes it difficult for even families that have lived here and their kids are graduating college and they want to buy. It's just kind of a tidal wave of difficulty when it comes to purchasing a home.
Yeah, well, I think that's a good segue to the gentleman sitting next to you. Ed Fry is a local citizen and lawyer, and he's basically a proponent for better distribution of private and public property amongst the populace. And I think we see a lot in the Bay Area, the everything from homelessness to your unicorn Silicon Valley billionaires. So how did you make this your passion in life, and what's your vision?
Well, I've practiced law now for 50 years and 35 years here in Santa Cruz. And I've represented mostly middle class and poor people during that time. I do a lot of landlord and tenant work and employer-employee and that sort of thing. And I see so many people being priced out of the market the way has just been explained, and having to move away from Santa Cruz. Mm-hmm. So I think this country, and it's true in a lot of different other places in this country too, that we really need to have a public dialogue, an ongoing dialogue about the inequity and the unfairness of how real property is distributed among all of our people. Mm-hmm. We really need to become more compassionate about people's lives and their housing facilities available to them. I represent a lot of homeless people too, and they're the most victimized probably by our situation. But trying to purchase or even maintain a house in Santa Cruz is becoming less and less possible for so many people. And so I really think we need to look at the fact that, for example, someone might live in Paris or London or New York and want to buy a nice home here. I live over near Opal Cliff. Mm-hmm. Not a bunch of beautiful, expensive homes over there. A lot of them are not occupied, except maybe 2 or 3 times a year.
Yeah, the gardener and the house cleaner see it more often than the owners.
Exactly.
So,
while there are, huge numbers of people who have no home at all. These people have 6 homes. Homeless people have none.
So, what would the ideal solution? Let's say if you were in a position of power like Mr. Terrazas over here, what would your platform be to create a solution?
Well, I don't know about platform. It would be a redistribution of the occupancy of real property. I think the concept of property itself is a dangerous one. It really amounts to theft in many situations, most situations, in fact, I think. So we really need to think about ownership and all those basic concepts, and with the eye to redistributing the available housing among everybody on an equitable basis.
All very good concepts, and I'm always amazed how somebody will come along with a great philosophy, say Karl Marx, for example, and then you see it in the hands of human nature, and it always seems to somehow go awry. But I think it's important that we all keep that, at least that ideal in mind, and it's nice to see somebody who's dedicated at least the last 35 years of his life to this. So I hope.
The reason why things go awry is because of the dysfunctional political system that we have. I mean, that's what really needs to be attacked first, before we can really deal with it and get a political discourse going about real property and other vital issues.
A good start is all the ears that are in this room, because these are all people that are very actively involved politically. So sitting next to you is Darius Mosinine, who's one of the probably one of the larger housing providers, privately at least, in both Santa Cruz and Monterey Bay Area. So I guess talking about Ed's, or addressing Ed's distribution of wealth, can you explain how you personally address that, having a lot and then having by my observation, you've got a very compassionate way of basically treating your tenants, and you're very active in the community.
I have to admit, I'm very conflicted in terms of the fact that, yes, there is folks like myself, my family that are, it's a family business too, have quite a bit of paper wealth from the huge appreciation in our real estate holdings. We have 53 units spread across, in Santa Cruz that is, spread across 4 buildings. And you look at it, and why I'm conflicted is, so we bought we bought these properties anywhere from, for instance, my first property I bought on my own, 1986, when I was a year out of college, for $140,000, a triplex across from City Hall, and it's probably $1 million now. Of course, you would know better. You know cap rates and these the valuations, but close at least $900,000, $300,000 a unit, and Sure, I've upgraded, I've done a lot of work to it. But you look at it, the tenants that have been renting have been carrying, this is where I'm conflicted, carrying the cost of me holding this property as it's appreciated. They really haven't, I didn't do anything magic to make it go from 140,000 to 900,000. And if I didn't have tenants renting, I would be having to feed the beast,
Right.
the mortgage, taxes, insurance. So I'm conflicted in my liberal progressive side says, gosh, don't they deserve some of that wealth creation? On the other hand, my more business side says this is the nature of real estate in not only the United States but the world, and it's all driven by consumer demand.
So I have Ed
So
sitting- Ed
I'm
sitting next
conflicted
to
in
you.
that.
Yeah, well, we have a lingering statement in the room of basically private property, at least in the capitalist sense, being theft. So going back to you, it seems you came by your properties honestly. Your family bought them and they were fortunate they got in when they did. And Ed, you were obviously fortunate to, I assume you own your property in Opal Cliffs? You do not?
I've never dealt with a bank at all.
Oh, wow.
In terms of mortgages, just bank accounts, that's all I've had. I don't believe in stamping my name on a piece of sacred property. And all property is sacred as far as I'm concerned, all land. So no, I don't own it and I never will.
If you go back to the American Indians, I mean, the term of Indian giver, I understand was Indians did not have a concept of ownership, land, cattle, horses. It was community property. And so when they gave a horse, say, to the white man, and then they asked for it to use it again, the white man came up with this way, no, it's mine, you gave it to me. And that's where the term Indian giver came from. So it's whole concept of community ownership, including the land.
Well,
and it's an interesting, I mean, it's a very advanced concept if you think.
Well, it is. It's something that's being done in Europe. I mean, most countries outside of ours have basically assigned public rental housing where value is taken out of the equation. And they had tenements and things back in the 50s and 60s, but they were largely phased out here. But there've been some very good articles in Fast Company, for example, that propose having that. Again, this would involve turning to our government, which I think our local government is very proactive and honorable. But when you look at the national level, I just wonder how they can ever get anything like that done. So then it comes back to this quandary. And here we are wrestling. I own property as well, and it's a bit of it's a conundrum, to say the least. But one of the ways you do rent to, you have, how many of those units are low income?
Well, I have about almost half that are Section 8. I'm a big believer in subsidized housing. I love the Section 8 program. The problem is, there's not enough of it in terms of enough subsidies. We've got, 8-9 year waiting lists these days. When they're open, it's been closed for 5, 7, 8 years. Frankly, but what I think, there are some out of the box ideas. For instance, I, as a property owner, with this enormous appreciation, I would not object to what I call reverse regressive property tax. Basically, the longer you have owned a property, and keep this local in Santa Cruz. Santa Cruz County is a good laboratory for this. Mm-hmm. The longer you've owned the property, the more parcel tax you pay on your December tax bill that goes to a housing fund. So basically, imagine local Section 8. And so we get taxed like $400 on my $10,000 property tax bill. That's not going to notice it.
Yeah, it's not going to kill you.
But if it goes to, if I know it's going to subsidize the teacher who got a rent increase or trying to rent something, even the guy filling the Slurpee machine at 7-Eleven, I would be okay with that as a property owner. Because, and for example, imagine an organization, keep it lean and mean, where folks have housing cost strain. Either they got a big rent increase, or there's some other disruptive event where they need to rent their own place, and they need even a couple $100s a month. Not full Section 8, which pays 70% of your rent, but just a couple $100 a month would make the difference between them being able to stay, teach in our community, or be some productive member of our community. And It's means based, unlike rent control.
Right.
So you go to the organization, the local.
You have to qualify, not
You
just how you get
qualify.
in, but on an annual basis, you have to still qualify.
You qualify, and so they run the numbers, and they come say, you know what? We'll pay 75%, $200. We'll pay $150 of your rent increase as long as you live there,
And just
and it's going to come from property tax.
to circle back to David, currently, is it what 15% of new developed housing has to be low income? Is that the current?
It depends on the type of development, but generally 15% of the housing is set aside for affordable units when they're built. But I just wanted to comment on some of the things that have been said by the other speakers just now. The city of Santa Cruz is about 68,000 people here. We're one of the smallest counties in the state in population, and we also don't have a lot of land that can be developed here. And so it's easy to talk about these things from a micro level, like I think in a sense about, hey, how can you try and move things around on a smaller scale? But I think there's some really big housing needs that need to be looked at statewide. And when we look at some of the state legislation that's been passed recently, for example, school districts now are looking at available land that they have to help increase housing for teachers, as you mentioned, to make sure that one, they can provide affordable housing for teachers that work here locally as well as administrators. And I think those are opportunities that cities should get behind to help some of our local jurisdictions to help utilize these maybe land that could be developed in ways to help serve kind of our local needs. So when we think about making measurements as far as rebates or others, I think there's things that we can be doing to help in the short term create more of a supply of housing for people here locally. And I think it's going to take some collaboration between different jurisdictions, and it's not just going to be something that the city does on its own to try and figure out what those new developments are.
Well, I think the private sector can definitely, hopefully, have an impact on that as well. We have also with us Jim Weller, who's a land title consultant. So how does that, in addition to being a lay minister, how does your role as a land title consultant give you insight into perhaps some land use possibilities for properties that aren't currently being deployed?
Well,
in the highest and best way.
People know me in two different phases of my life. In my professional phase, I'm a lifelong title insurance company executive who went into private practice 15 years ago. And so since then, I've been consulting with lawyers and landowners and developers.
Thanks for joining us. Great to have you here.
I'm sorry. My apologies. This is a really good discussion. I'll do it again, okay?
Absolutely.
We'll have the same group.
Appreciate you having you.
Great having you.
You never know who you're going to get, but we were really glad to have you.
Yeah, do it again, right? Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Sorry I didn't finish this.
And in the other phase of my life, I'm a minister of the most progressive Protestant denomination in the United States. So I'm a member of Peace United Church of Christ, and my ministry is in the community. I'm a community organizer for social justice concerns. Most recently, that work has had to do with the Sanctuary Santa Cruz Network and assisting undocumented immigrants. But to get back to housing, I learned a long time ago that our system of land ownership, as my friend here describes, is systematically unjust and structurally impoverishes great numbers of people. However, I also learned that it's not something that we're going to change in a generation or 2 or 3 generations.
Yeah. People are well-meaning, but I don't know if humans are smart enough to figure it out on their own.
Right. So I don't worry about that anymore. I just try to do the best I can where I am. What I'm doing that I'm very excited about is leading my church in development of a sizable affordable housing project
Nice.
on our church land in Santa Cruz,
That is awesome.
where it's still in the feasibility stage, and I can't talk about details because I have equity investor partners and developer partners. But if all things go well, we will create as many as 30 affordable housing units on our land on the Upper West Side in Santa Cruz. And I see that as a model there are other churches and other organizations that have excess land
Right.
in the community.
I believe the Catholic Church is the largest property owner in the country, I heard, for example.
And not having to build in the cost of land into the development equation is a big advantage.
Huge.
See, we have no land cost. All we have is the cost of development and the cost of investment. So anyway, I'll just say that that's going to occupy me for the next several years.
Well, that's a great cause, and I
Yeah.
think it ties in. We have Dan Coughlin and Lynn Renshaw, who are both co-founders of Santa Cruz Together, and they're on a campaign as concerned citizens because some of the well-meaning members of Santa Cruz have proposed rent control, and I think the two of you have seen some issues with it based on things that have happened in other communities that passed rent control and now are backtracking. So, Lynn, do you want to speak a little bit to that? And do you agree? Do you agree that Jim's campaign to add 30 housing units? I think everyone sees that would be a whole lot.
Yeah, that's excellent. There's no question that we have a painful and severe shortage of affordable housing. The problem statement that's what's going on, everybody agrees to that. It's plain and clear. Our focus is probably the most specific of what anybody's said, and it's about the details of the particular rent control initiative. So one theme of that and some of the talking points is the way that it protects tenants. But even with the rent control initiative, if it passes, it won't protect tenants from high initial rents and today's current high rents. It also won't protect tenants against their homes being sold. As people are afraid of the extreme laws, the property owners will sell to owner occupants. It also won't protect tenants from its own new disincentives to not rent to families, older people, and people with disabilities. And it also won't protect neighborhoods from the impacts that occur when you have bad tenants that get to remain in properties indefinitely. Things like party houses, meth houses, extra large households, more cars, traffic, noise. It will create permanent nuisances that'll change the character of our neighborhoods. So, today, if a property manager gets a lot of complaints, what they will do is, they'll get the complaints, and then when a lease expires, they'll find new renters that have less of an impact on the neighborhood. This will go away because tenants would get the right to stay indefinitely.
So the end of the lease doesn't mean the end of the occupancy. Okay.
Yeah, and this is a big change where people are confused because it's such a major change to, in my lifetime, a lease has always meant, when it expires, it expires. But in this case, it gets to go on indefinitely.
And they can't, now that it's been drafted and balloted, it can't be changed? They couldn't say, well, let's take out that part.
Right, yeah. So this is an initiative which amends the city charter. And so word for word, it cannot be changed unless there is another citizen initiative that gets a 2/3 majority vote, which is a high bar. So it can pass with a simple majority, but to change even a single word requires a 2/3 majority. So that's a really bad way to make a law. But the reason I was bringing up the permanent nuisance part is that is something that should concern everybody who lives in the city of Santa Cruz. So they'll be in these neighborhoods and they will find that there's rentals where the owners can no longer control who is living there, how long they are living there, or actually even how many people are living in the household. So for example, a renter could move in family members or legally undefined partners up to one person per 50 square feet. So you could end up with 16 people in a 1,300 square foot according to the federal housing department standard. So this is going to change neighborhoods and create permanent nuisances. And the people behind the initiative will say, well, there's a provision where you can get evicted for a nuisance, but it only applies to when one person on a property is disturbing another person on that same property. So it doesn't cover the next door neighbor, the person across the street.
So it sounds like there are clear issues. Dan, the two of you.
Yeah, specifically, yeah. So Lynn brought up a number of specific cases with the three parts of the initiative. So there's a rent cap. There's the just cause eviction rules, and then there's the rent board that's got it's pretty well spelled out in the initiative. And what Lynn's describing are really just from an economic standpoint, from a policy standpoint, are disincentives tremendous disincentives for housing provider to continue to expand or create more supply, or even to continue to have his or her home as a rental property.
So
And
how does this tie into you? How are you personally
I'm a
affected?
mom and pop landlord, and
How many properties do you have?
just one. That would be two eventually with my wife's family. But it's really I'm motivated. This is my home. My wife's third generation, and we decided that this is going to be our home. And I saw this policy come through the pipe, and I truly feel in my heart it's going to destroy the character of this town.
So it's ironic because I've talked to people from the aptly named Movement for Housing Justice. Both sides feel like the other vision is unfair, and clearly you feel that the ordinance that's been proposed would not be fair. So,
Yeah, well, not fair. It's that's really a subjective test, but it's more. It's been studied. This is one of the most highly studied housing economic policies in the country, and it's not just that we have an opinion on it, that there's data, and the data is clear. 95% of economists agree that this will create less housing and less quality housing. And it's already happening in Santa Cruz. Just the threat of this ballot measure. There's been I think it was 2 weeks ago. As of 2 weeks ago, there were 113 units that have been sold or on the market.
yeah.
And so people are, and we have, we're doing polling in our group, and people are going to sell.
So I think it was encouraging to hear David here because he spoke very little on that and more about. I do think I've seen a shift, and I think it's largely been from the feedback of citizens like the two of you, who I understand you guys actually went and canvassed neighborhoods today.
Yes, we did.
So what was that like?
It's great to be engaged in democracy. This
Yeah.
is democracy. It's hands-on.
Well, it's
So it's training, because we'll be doing that come October, November for the ballot measure.
Well,
So I wanted to bring up one point on what Dan was saying.
we have about a minute left, so.
So we're not speculating about the impacts of rent control. We have temporary rent control in effect now. On Craigslist, you can find a 3-bedroom house still rents for $5,200. So we can see right now that it's not helping the situation. We have rent control now. One can look around and see what's available and what the prices are. So it's not changing the prices.
Well, right. The gouging landlords are frozen, and they're still gougers, and then the nice ones are frozen in their position.
New rentals have unlimited rents.
So, well, I think we're basically out of time as usual. We could talk for days, and we'll certainly have many more episodes. I appreciate each of you being here, and the discussion continues in terms of distribution of private property and the right way to handle things. Thank you for joining us. I'm Donna Carlson.
Thanks for watching the BTS Presents Show.
I'm Donna Carlson, broker and owner of Main Street Realtors. Thanks for joining us.